What's the goal for the Cleveland Browns in 2025? I know my answer. I'll tell you, coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer Sherman, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast, and proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. What is the goal for the Cleveland Browns in 2025? I know what I believe it is, and I'll tell you. Also, two position battles outside of the quarterback competition, which we know is going to be where everyone's paying attention to, that I will be watching closely here as OTAs begin this week for the Browns. First, though, I do want to thank you for being in every day with the Locked On Browns podcast, making us your first listen every single day. Remember, you can find Cleveland Browns content with Locked On Browns every week, Monday through Friday, guaranteed, plus bonus content on some weekends. It's totally free to you. Just hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you listen to your podcast. And, of course, the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. You can also get involved in the show by sharing your thoughts on anything we discuss in the comments section. This is your team, so be part of the conversation every single day. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. I have been thinking about this ever since we had the conversation last week about Mike Clay of ESPN putting out some projections of what he thought the Browns quarterbacks and really the top rookies that we're going to be talking about this year just across the NFL are going to produce next year, and how the numbers were based off of Shedeur Sanders playing 4 games, Dillon Gabriel playing 5 games, and what they hypothetically could look like if that's the scenario that plays out. Now, what's interesting is that does kind of map out the way that I think this quarterback situation will play out. I think there's going to be a veteran who starts the season, and then they pave way for those two guys later in the season to take over, and I think you owe it to yourselves, if you're the Browns, to play both those players. But I think it's important to think, and I want you to think about this during this segment, and maybe throughout the show even, and feel free to hit me in the comment section at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. You can tweet me at Spencito_. I want to know what you think the goal is for the 2025 season for this Browns organization. And there's a key distinction there between the Browns organization and if you were asking a player what the goal is. Because the player is going to tell you the same thing. They're going to say, we got to make the playoffs. We got to win our division. We got to achieve these certain things in the standings and on the field and in terms of winning things. And that's very fair. Teams don't like to use the word rebuild. It's the most taboo phrase that you can bring up that teams stay away from. They do not want to utter those words. So they will never say that. But I do believe by the time the season rolls around, I think there will be fans. This always happens when you get excited about the NFL season, who talk themselves into, man, this Browns team, maybe they got a chance. Maybe they have a chance to make the playoffs. And so if that ends up being you, I get it. And yes, I get why generally, every year, the main goal is going to be, let's get in the playoffs, let's chase that championship. But we need to be honest with ourselves, and I think we have been honest throughout this offseason in terms of the state of this franchise. And they are, I think, have kind of started to flirt with the idea that they are a rebuilding team to a degree. They're trying to do it on the fly. They're trying to do it by supplementing the roster with younger talent around some of the key figures that are already here. And that's a fine way to try to make this thing work and fix the direction of the franchise. But that when Jimmy Haslam made those comments at the owners' meetings, and he says, we need to dig ourselves out of this hole we created with the Deshaun deal, and he admitted it was a big swing and a miss, I think that was the first realization we got from the organization, or first admission from the organization, that they understand where they're at. They understand that they are a team in flux, in transition. They're not a Super Bowl contending team right now, and they got to find a way to get back to that. And I think that's what they're doing. That's what they've tried to do this offseason. I think that's what this season ends up being about. And the biggest thing for me, as I think about what the main goal is for 2025, and this is the number one thing you are looking to achieve or figure out when you're a rebuilding team, is discovering if you have a franchise quarterback or not. You have to figure out if one of these two rookies is the guy for the future. I guess you could throw Kenny Pickett into the mix and say, can this guy be your Sam Darnold? But I even have my doubts about Sam Darnold. Yes, did he have a great season last year? Of course. Do I think he could just go anywhere though and play to the level he did? And I also think you saw still Sam Darnold's shortcomings rear their ugly head late in the season, in that game against the Lions in the last week of the season, in the playoff game they played against the Rams. There were those the shortcomings of Sam Darnold's game emerged. And so I think those same things would sort of happen with Kenny Pickett. I'm not sold or going into the season believing Kenny Pickett is the long-term solution, but the Browns have talked him up so much, maybe they believe that. And they think they can sort of revive his career in this way. But the bigger thing for me is the two rookies. The two rookies are the key here. Those are the guys that you want to find out, can they bring something to the table that finally cements that position for us? That's the thing that's eluded the Browns. The Deshaun Watson deal was supposed to solve it. It hasn't. And you're still searching for that position specifically. We've talked about it on this show. Shedeur Sanders was at least should have been a day two pick. A lot of the scouts out there, people that I verified with, a lot of the professional analysts, guys who have worked in scouting departments, Daniel Jeremiah, for example, who I have a lot of respect for, and in terms of like his history as a guy who used to work in scouting for teams in the NFL. Like they all say that. If that's true, if that's the level he's supposed to play to, you got to figure out if like he can actually be that guy. If he has something in there that teams just overlooked, and as he slipped through the draft, they're going to live to regret. The same thing applies to Dillon Gabriel, right? 3rd round pick. Browns clearly believe in him. There's reasons to feel good about his game, the way he throws the football. His rhythm is solid. He has really good technique, like his throwing motion is solid. He's very refined in the way that he does these things, and I think he has a chance to be successful in Kevin Stefanski's offense. The height is his biggest detriment, and we got to see him now do it out in competitive environments like we're going to see at OTAs this week. But as I think about those projections from Mike Clay, and I think about the goal of this season, finding out if one of those guys is the guy is priority number one, hands down, without question in my mind. Listen, if you're gonna comment and say it's win a Super Bowl, it's compete for the playoffs, yes, that is the blanket statement these teams will feed you every year. But we know the reality of where this team is, and for me, it comes down to you got to find out if you have a quarterback on this roster that can be your guy for the future or not. And so along those lines, as I think about again those Mike Clay projections, I almost feel inclined to say, it makes more sense for me to start those quarterbacks sooner rather than later. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think it's going to be a veteran for the first 6 to 7 weeks, and then they'll reassess when necessary, and they'll split the difference between those two guys late in the season. But honestly, it makes more sense if I'm sitting there telling you right now, looking you in the face and in the eyes and saying, listen, they got to find out if one of these quarterbacks is the guy, because frankly, you have 2 first-round picks next year. Maybe you use one of them to draft that quarterback of the future if one of these guys isn't it. Maybe you pair both of them together to trade up to get that quarterback that you think is the guy if one of these guys isn't it. But you got to have a good assessment of if these where these guys are at, and if they can be starting caliber and future for the face of the franchise for you for years to come before you go into next year's draft and make any kind of decisions what you're going to do with those first round picks. That's where my head's at with it. And so I want to, in all seriousness, I would actually prefer that one of the rookies starts the year, and you go into it with a plan of like one of them's going to start, the other one, if that one struggles, is going to take over midway through, and we'll kind of just see this thing play out as it does, and let it be a trial by fire thing, and let them figure it out. That's kind of the way I would rather see this competition go. Because I think we know the truth on Joe Flacco. I think we know the truth on Kenny Pickett. I don't need to see those guys. I don't think, again, the organization is going to play it that way, because I think they want to nurture these guys and give them time and be patient with it and not thrust them in there too soon. But it actually makes more sense to get a larger sample size of games for both these guys in order to determine if there's anything there viable that you can bank on being a franchise quarterback in this quarterback room already. So if it's Dillon Gabriel week 1 till week 8, week 9, fine. If it's Shedeur week 1 to week 8, week 9, and then you flip them, fine. If that guy you start week 1 turns out to be amazing and he plays the entire season, you kind of have your answer. You know you can build around one of these guys, and then you're gonna say back, well, what would you do with the other guy then? Like now you have 2 rookies, you're just sitting there. You got to play both of them. If one of them takes off and is amazing, that's a good problem to have. That you have a backup guy that maybe you haven't seen the full picture on and you're still evaluating, and he's going to take some time. You can always trade one later. That's a luxury to me. So I am inclined to tell you that as much as I don't, again, I think the Browns are going to start a veteran and then let the rookies duke it out the way Mike Clay laid out over like the last 9 games or so, and maybe split them up between the two. But it actually makes more sense when I think about the goal for the Browns in 2025 of finding out if you have a quarterback on this roster or not, or if you need to draft one next year. That's the main goal, in my estimation. And if that's your main goal, it would actually make more sense with 2 rookies on this roster to start a rookie week 1 and then maybe split halfway through the season if he struggles with the other guy and see which one is a potential answer for you or not. Get as big of a picture as you can on either of these guys before you go in the next year's draft. That is what I want to find out in 2025 for the Cleveland Browns. A key position battle takes center stage on the offensive side of the ball outside of the quarterback competition. We talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action, and FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live as the game is going on. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. If you've got a read on who's heating up, why not turn it into a same-game parlay or a live in-game parlay? Yes, that's right. You can pair in-game statistical numbers from guys or outcomes that you think might happen and make it into a parlay while you're watching in real time. Maybe you think Tyrese Halliburton's going to hit another game-winning shot. Maybe you think Jalen Brunson's going to put his clutch player of the year to use and pull the Knicks up from a 20-point deficit to win. Whatever it might be, FanDuel has you covered with more ways to win than ever. If you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet, and if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, so we know the quarterback competition is going to be the number one thing people are paying attention to at OTAs, which start up this week for the Browns. I'll be out there Wednesday live in person to sort of check it out, see it for you, let you know how it goes, let you know what we're witnessing, and we'll talk more about the big things, overarching things I'm looking for, especially when it comes to the quarterbacks on Wednesday's show. But there are some competitions that will start heating up now this time of year, and I want to be clear, like, this time of year is more about, like, you know, getting acclimated to, especially for rookies, like to the playbook, making sure that things are functioning properly and those types of things. It's less about like who has more snaps and who's first on the depth chart. Like those things will sort themselves out in training camp. But this time of year, there's certain things you're looking for, like I said, which I'll get into tomorrow. But with the quarterback competition being the thing everyone's mostly focused on, I don't want to neglect some other areas that I think are important to, you know, watch or check the reporting on in terms of like how things are going and what is happening, because there are a couple position battles that are going to be critical to the Browns season. And I think the first one on the offensive side of the ball is that left tackle spot. Dawand Jones is likely to be first up at that position. You saw him play the left tackle position in relief of Jedrick Wills last year, and he held his own. He showed some promise, had some solid PFF grades, and I think they have a belief that maybe he can be their left tackle of the future if he can build upon that. And the biggest thing for him, of course, is just staying healthy. But that's aside from quarterback, of course, that is the most glaring hole that the Browns are sort of looking to fill. And it comes at one of the most important positions because the offensive line is so critical, and that left tackle spot is extremely critical. And so they're going to have to figure out what that kind of looks like. And so Dawand Jones will get the first kind of snap, the first look at that, I would imagine. But you can't forget that like Cornelius Lucas as a swing tackle is on this roster, who they signed in the offseason. You can't forget that he played a lot of left tackle last year for the Commanders and did a solid job at it. Like this team prioritized adding a lot of depth at along the offensive line, because every year it seems they have this epidemic of injuries up front, and they don't have necessarily the bodies or the players to sort of fill in and keep things moving. So they made that a priority this offseason, and I think it's going to end up being Dawand Jones who starts the year. But seeing what he looks like this time of year as he's coming back from that broken leg, Seeing how he's maybe learning the position, because a guy who's played mostly right tackle throughout his career, and including in the NFL here for his first couple seasons, it's everything's opposite. He is still sort of a novice at left tackle specifically, in terms of like learning how to handle that side of the offensive line. And he only had the handful of games last year to start to come into his own at that spot. So that'll be worth watching, seeing how he's getting in and out of the huddle, what he looks like those types of things are going to be something that I have my eye on. And if there's anybody else who gets kind of thrown into the mix there, that they're at least like trying, because I do think it's going to be let's spitball some things, let's try some things during OTAs and mandatory minicamp, and then ultimately training camp, to see what sticks. And if Dawand emerges as the guy, then great. But I think they feel like they might have some options there and some depth there, especially with Cornelius Lucas, to give some different things a try. And so it'll be worth monitoring how that position is kind of coming about. Again, it's early. We won't have all the answers until August there, but to at least see the initial viewpoint of it and how they're handling it will be something to keep an eye on. I also, I don't even know if it's like wide receiver is important, so I don't want to say it's like a secondary position battle, but the wide receiver room and those rotations is another group that shouldn't be slept on the offensive side in terms of things to watch this time of year, and then deeper into summer during training camp, because we know Jerry Jeudy is the top guy. And so I'm looking to see who stands out beyond Jerry Jeudy, who's maybe making a name for themselves now and setting the tone for later this summer to try to cement themselves as that third wide receiver. I think the Browns believe Cedric Tillman is that second wide receiver, but that's why this time of year, mandatory minicamp, etc., talk about setting the tone. He's got to set the tone for taking another step in his game and another step in his development in terms of coming along and embracing that role that he's expected to have for the team, because they view him as a long-term answer, and they view him as somebody that can be a staple and focal point in this offense, but he has to prove it. He has to go out and actually do it now on the field, and obviously we don't know the full picture of Cedric Tillman to this point. He's still growing into his role and into his what he can do and his ceiling. And so we'll see what that all looks like. But Tillman is somebody to watch. And then behind that, you have Diontae Johnson, who's a proven commodity in the NFL, aside from the off the field stuff. The guess right now is that he's kind of that next man up, but does anybody else step up and seize this opportunity? David Bell, for example, what is he, as he comes back from an injury last season, what does he look like? You have Michael Woods, who is a late round pick of Andrew Berry that they're hoping can maybe become something. So there's a lot of wishing and hoping at that position, aside from maybe those top two guys. And even with the second guy in Cedric Tillman, it's this game it's this kind of waiting game to see if he can take that next step. And so that's another spot that's going to be important to sort of monitor. Yes, it's only OTAs and there's only so much you can gather this time of year. But seeing those initial steps for that group and who maybe stands out in a weaker position group for the Browns right now, I think is going to be critical. And as I've talked about, I still think Andrew Berry might have something up his sleeve at that position in terms of a trade at some point this summer. Maybe somebody flashes really nicely at OTAs and mandatory minicamp, and they're like, you know what, maybe we can hold off on this for now, or maybe we don't need a wide receiver, and that'll sort of set the tone for what that group looks like in August, and how they sort of handle that group leading up to the season, and any decisions that may be looming in that regard. So those are the two on offense. Left tackle, as we know, a huge priority, something they didn't address. And ironically, it's the two positions that they didn't address in the draft that we thought were going to be higher priorities for them in the NFL draft. The tackle spots and the wide receiver spot, two needs for this team all off season long. And it's the two positions that we're still sort of waiting for some answers for. And we'll start to see some of those things in the early stages of the offseason program here, OTAs, which get rolling this week. You can't ignore a key position battle on the defensive side of the ball either. We'll talk about that and highlight what position I'm talking about, who's in the mix for it, coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. All right, so we talked about two key position battles on the offensive side of the ball. We need to go to the defensive side of the ball for this next one though, because we know that this was another need, and I talked about it in the lead up to the draft. I didn't necessarily think that safety was something that the Browns are going to focus on in the draft. They have Grant Delpit there, who they still feel really good about, a Andrew Berry pick, and I think they want to see him continue to blossom. But the other safety spot, the free safety spot, is kind of up for grabs right now after Juan Thornhill was released as a June 1st cut earlier this offseason. And so who takes that opportunity? My guess and assumption this entire offseason has been that they would just ride it out with Ronnie Hickman, and they wouldn't necessarily draft a safety. I thought if they had kept, they had 9 picks going into draft initially going into draft weekend. I thought if they'd stayed put with all those, or actually made 9 picks, at some point they probably would have gotten around to drafting a safety. But that didn't bear itself out. They only took 7 players. And so safety I didn't think was going to be that high of a priority. I think they like Ronnie Hickman. I think they feel really good about Ronnie Hickman and his ability to, over these last couple years, out of necessity, he's played a lot of snaps because there's been injuries. Juan Thornhill's had several, and he's had to sort of step in and embrace that role. And he's made some plays, frankly. Like, he's been a pretty viable player for them at times. There's been some blown coverages in there. There's been some lapses, but he's a young player. He's an undrafted free agent, like guy that you're hoping to get something out of, that maybe, you strike lightning in the bottle, if you will. And he ends up being formidable for you and sort of solidifying the back end of the defense. But the defense is so strong already, which is part of the reason why I was like, if they have like one hole that they're just trying to sort of fill and figure out and let that be a camp conversation, I thought it would be this safety spot specifically. And so I think Hickman enters OTAs and enters this summer as the leader in the clubhouse there. But they made a couple safety additions in free agency with Rayshon Jenkins and DeMonte Casey, that I think will be in the mix here and will play an interesting role in terms of figuring out if it is going to be Hickman or if it's going to be one of these veteran guys that they feel better about. And what's interesting about both those guys is the idea that you obviously have Rayshon Jenkins is more of a strong safety. And so I don't know that he fits that spot specifically great. But, if he ends up being the best safety that you have during camp, maybe they slide him over and they have him and Delpit sort of playing off of each other back there in the back end of the secondary. DeMonte Casey, on the other hand, is somebody who they also, he comes over from Pittsburgh last year, who they've seen certainly on tape, and he is more of, I think, that free safety role. And so he, right now, I think slots in as the primary backup to Ronnie Hickman. But I think all three of those guys are going to be kind of in the mix, duking it out for that other safety spot. And they'll see where the chips kind of fall. Go from there. But that is the spot that obviously people are going to be paying attention to, and rightfully so, because it's the one hole I think right now this team has on defense that you don't necessarily have like an answer to. You could say, who's that pass rusher opposite of Myles Garrett, which is another area I will be paying attention to without question, because Isaiah McGuire, Alex Wright, do they finally sort of come into their own here and seize some opportunities that they're going to get at that spot? Who maybe takes the reins? Who becomes that guy? In past years, it's been a veteran that they signed or traded for, paired opposite of him. They invested in the interior of the defensive line by taking Mason Graham. You got to figure out who that guy on the outside opposite of Myles Garrett's going to be. Could it be Obo Okoronkwo, the veteran of the group, who there were some questions about if he'd even be back this year, and I think that's a fair question still. Could he maybe not make this roster when it's all said and done? So that's a conversation that has to play out. And I do think, without question, if you're not paying attention to that battle, then you're missing something, or you're doing yourself a disservice, because yes, the other defensive end spot is a key part of this defense, and something that's going to be highly contested between a couple of different guys. But the safety spot is one that, because of the nature of it, and because I sort of figured they wouldn't prioritize it in the draft, There's a big question there. The other spot you kind of know, like, okay, there's a couple guys who are here, and it might end up just being more of like a rotational spot anyway when it's all said and done, with one guy maybe getting just the majority of snaps barely, because that's kind of how it works on the defensive line. But at safety, like, you want somebody back there that you feel like is going to be out there for the majority of the time, the way that they thought Juan Thornhill would be, and then obviously it didn't work out with him. And so, yeah, like, you want that one sort of cemented with a solid player and somebody who's going to be out there for the majority of the snaps. And so figuring that out is going to be a key conversation this organization has in OTAs, mandatory minicamp, training camp, etc. And like I said, I think Ronnie Hickman has the leg up right now. I'll also say this in terms of the secondary. If that's like your one spot, that's your weakness. Like, I mentioned the defensive line. I think linebacker would have been a bigger question if you didn't draft Carson Schlesinger, which they did, to sort of fill that JOK role. I think that group is going to be okay. We have to see how the legal process plays out with Devin Bush, but obviously Devin Bush is another guy that you feel pretty good about in that group, on top of Jordan Hicks. And then on the outside, this organization still has high hopes for Martin Emerson Jr., and we know Denzel Ward is Denzel Ward. So it really is like the safety spot is your biggest question mark, and that defensive end opposite of Myles Garrett is your second biggest question mark. And so those are two areas I'm going to be watching, but the safety spot especially, because we don't necessarily know like who is the guy there. There's defensive end, again, you can throw some different names around and you can have different opinions about it. I think it's going to be Hickman back there, but that one feels even more open than anything else on the defensive side of the ball. So seeing if anybody stands out there, seeing if anybody has like the early lead in the clubhouse at that spot. Those are some of the things I'm going to be sort of watching for here during the couple weeks ahead here of OTAs, and then as we turn the corner into veteran or mandatory minicamp, which then sets the stage for the summer months ahead, where it'll be the long haul, the long wait, if you will, till training camp begins at the end of July and early August. So looking forward to getting there with you. Looking forward to bridging that summer gap with you in the weeks and months ahead. I will have plenty more for you this week as another episode of the Locked On Browns podcast is down. Thanks for joining me to talk about your favorite football team. Wednesday's show, we'll continue the conversation around OTAs with the key things that you should be paying attention to, or the key things that you should take note of during OTAs. Because, listen, like the reps and stuff, I'm not as worried about that, especially when it comes to the quarterbacks. And I think it's important to sort of verify those things with you, so you know what you should be sort of listening and looking for out of these practices. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button to make Locked On Browns your first listen every day. And for your second listen, you can check out Locked On NFL Scouting, or you can keep it local and check out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being an everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you again real soon, Cleveland. See ya.